Excitement is back in the building in Flowery Branch. Let's break down Raheem Morris's grand vision for the future of the Atlanta Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, guys, if you know me, if you don't know me, I am, of course, your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for too many years. Formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. You may also know me as Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I appreciate each and every one of you that is an everydayer of this podcast that makes it your first watch or first listen of the day. And become an everydayer, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, I will be joined by Tori McElhaney of AtlantaFalcons.com, making her triumphant return to the podcast to coincide with the triumphant return of Eddie Goldman back to the Atlanta Falcons. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the Falcons beginning their offseason, Tori's thoughts on draft plans, free agency, all that stuff and more. So without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Tori McElhaney of AtlantaFalcons.com right now. All right, everyone, we are back with an illustrious guest. She is none other than Tori McElhaney, who covers the Atlanta Falcons for the official website, AtlantaFalcons.com, and she is making her triumphant return to Locked On Falcons. I looked it up, Tori, and it's been like 18 months since you've been on the pod, and I'm just like, wow, that's a slight on my part. You know, part of it was because we talk every week on the football party on Locked On Sports Atlanta, and I was just like, last year I was just like, I don't want Tori to have to talk about this disappointing Falcons season more than once a week. So that was part of it why you weren't on the pod during the season. But now hopefully things are looking up for the Atlanta Falcons, and you will be a frequent guest on this show moving forward.
Frequent flyer. I know you say it's a triumphant return, and I'm kind of feeling like exhausted, like I'm just like crawling in here like, okay, let's do this.
So the Falcons started their offseason program. They got a little bit of an early start due to having a brand new head coach in Raheem Morris. And so I guess, Tori, I got to ask you, like, is the excitement back in the building now that, players are back?
I can say 100% yes. I think that the vibes are really high. I think there's a lot of excitement. And, I was actually talking to Terry Fontenot for a piece that we're for our On the Rise series earlier today, and just talking about the roster and how it's currently constructed and feeling like they feel really good with the team that they already have put together. And we're still a month away from the draft, and feeling, I don't know if you could have said that their first year here, Terry. I don't think you could say that their second year here. Like maybe you could have said that last year, but this whole idea of this team believes it can go and win immediately with the guys that they currently have on the roster, I think is such a compelling reason for having hope and honestly having like a rejuvenated sense of who they are, what their identity is. You do feel that every time you talk to somebody.
Now, you talk about feeling like the current roster as it's constructed, feeling excited about that. I always seem to express my disappointment with the Falcons and not being as active in free agency as I would like them to be. Like last year was like the first offseason and free agent period where I'm like, hey, right, they're actually doing all the things that I want them to do.
Right. Yeah.
That's a me issue. But it does seem to clearly show. Obviously, they made a big splash with picking up Kirk Cousins. They sort of remade the wide receiver room. But it does sort of speak, I think, to what you're talking about, where it does feel like this team clearly feels like their success is less tied to we need to bring in a bunch of outside pieces to upgrade the roster, and it's really about maximizing the already established internal pieces that they've assembled, especially on offense. And we heard Raheem Morris speak to that in the team's first meeting. I'm just curious, where do you sort of land on that in terms of, is it really about developing the talent that they've already assembled?
To a certain extent, I do believe that. They're going to go and draft. They're going to have a draft class. Like, we'll get to that point. But for right now, I think the team that they have constructed at this point in time is almost it's more of a reflection of the work that's been put in over the last 3 years. I think people forget how serious of a cap situation they were in 2 years ago and how much work it really did take to even field a team truly in 21 and to a certain extent in 22 as well. Last offseason was the first offseason, to your point, that they were able to make big moves in free agency. And I think because of those moves and because of what they were able to do with the defense has transferred into 2024 and what the expectations are for the team as it currently stands. And then you look at what was done in free agency with the defense. And then the counterpoint is, okay, what they did in the draft with these offensive weapons, and not just the drafts, but keeping players. You talk about that offensive line, keeping players under long-term contracts, paying Chris Lindstrom, keeping Caleb McGarry here, drafting Matthew Bergeron, extending Jake Matthews. I mean, all of those moves were these are all players outside of Matthew Bergeron that were brought in well before this regime got here. I'm talking about the Terry Fontenot, Arthur Smith regime. So all of these things are kind of happening simultaneously, and it's all kind of brought you to 2024. And I remember saying back in 2021, I know we've had conversations about this, that you weren't going to see the payoff of having to do what you had to do to stay cap eligible, having to piece players together and signing middling veterans on short-term 1-year cheap contracts. And now you're to the point where it's like, okay, you have these guys that you're paying some big money to because you believe in them, and then you've drafted some really intriguing talent. So it's kind of this 2024 year is almost like it's not the end goal by any means, but you see the route that it took to get to this point, and now it's time to go out and play ball.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. Still more to come on today's episode, and we'll pick Tori's brain on the upcoming draft plans as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on a 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. Their 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Now, when we look ahead towards the draft, it seems to me, from my perspective, and I'm curious if you agree with this, that things are leaning towards them, maybe prioritizing plugging some holes on defense. I'm looking at edge rusher, cornerback as two of the more prominent ones. And I'm sure they'll add pieces elsewhere, but it sort of leads me to the belief that a lot of the groundwork has already been laid on the offensive side of the ball, with the Falcons having a quarterback now and having premium players at some of those skill positions. Obviously, the offensive line is a unit that this team believes can be one of the top units in the NFL. And at various points over the last couple of years, it's played like that.
Right.
Does it sort of speak to this idea of Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake and the rest of that coaching staff sort of coming in here and not necessarily rebuilding the defense, but maybe like remaking the defense in their own image? You have some solid young pieces. You have AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates is certainly on the younger side of things. You have, Troy Anderson, as well, Clark Phillips, those guys on the back end. You've added some pieces like Zach Harrison and Arnold Ebiketie, but you have sort of two aging players in Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata who probably are not necessarily going, you're hoping, maybe play 2 or more years left. But does it kind of speak to, Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake kind of this draft is sort of key to sort of laying the groundwork for what will be core and foundational defensive pieces that they're going to develop over the next couple of years, so that the defense, as we look with the idea, again, it's kind of like imagining like this unit in 2026 is going to be like potentially one of the best defenses in the NFL. Is that kind of the vision that you're sort of seeing with what their plans are on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because you think about all the turnover and I'm not just talking within players on this defensive unit, but I'm talking with a coaching staff as well. You had Dean Pease, Ryan Nielsen, and now Jimmy Lake over a 3-year time period. That's a lot of change in a very, very short amount of time. And also having the amount of evolution of the roster churning constantly on this defensive side of the ball for the last 3 years. For me, when I look at what a long-term plan could be for a guy like Raheem Morris, Jimmy Lake, and the rest of the defensive staff, it's finding consistency, and it's finding players that you believe in for the long haul. And I truly think that that's something that we have not seen from this Falcons organization on the defensive side of the ball outside of Grady and AJ. And I kind of do feel like with this draft, potentially, you have the opportunity to bring in some really, really good defensive players that, like what you're saying, are helping you as much in 2026 as they are in 2024. And I really do believe that there is significant depth with this draft class, especially at the defensive positions. And, what's interesting too, and I can't remember if you said this or if it was Jarvis or somebody, but talking about how the pathway for offseason moves differ so much from last year to this year, and how last year with these free agents, it was like they were plugging and playing with this defense. They were living and dying in free agency with this defense. Now it's kind of flipped. You go out and pay a big money contract to your starting quarterback. You reload in with the wide receivers. So does that flip the strategy of what you're doing offensively in the draft? Because do you need to prioritize offensive players right now? Arguably, probably not really. You do need to prioritize this defense, because there are still, like we were talking about, there are some obvious holes still in with edge rusher. And I know I'm going to talk about an edge rusher until I'm blue in the face. I have been for 3 years, but like maybe this is the year. And then, of course, cornerback, which I recently did a mock draft that I had the Falcons trading down and acquiring a cornerback in the first round. And it's the more I think about drafting a corner for, especially if you were to sign AJ Terrell to a long-term extension, the more I like that idea, because think about AJ Terrell's 4 years here. He's never had a consistent running mate at all opposite him in his entire time here. That's a long time to kind of have the consistent level of play on one side of the field, but not necessarily feeling that on the other. If the Falcons were to kind of have like a long-term plan in place for AJ, and then you draft his running mate that pretty high, I kind of like that idea. And it's something that I've been toying around with. Are the Falcons going to do that? I don't know, but it's something to think about. Like, that's all this month is. The month of April is just nothing but projections. And like, everybody's going to be wrong at some point.
Now, kind of piggybacking on that point, because you got circle some of these positions, edge rusher, corner, sort of being two of the prominent ones. And I asked this question to Josh Kendall earlier this week. Is there sort of a pressure for the team to kind of move away from their best player available draft strategy to try to fill some of these needs, especially early in the draft, especially like when you talk about like edge rusher? One of the knocks on this draft class is like you have 3 really good guys at the top of the draft, but then there's kind of a big drop off there. And so does that pressure a team like the Falcons, who want to upgrade that position, to maybe take that position a little bit earlier than maybe a best player available strategy would push you towards? And the same thing with cornerback. Do you feel like the Falcons need to focus a little bit more on need, or can they still rely on their best player available strategy?
Here's the thing is I don't think it's crazy to think that they could get both with one pick because, and the reason I say this is because I do see a world where quarterbacks are going in those first 5 picks. And so every time a quarterback is taken off the board, the best player available continues to move down. And if you're the Falcons sitting there at number 8 overall, I think there is a very good opportunity that you kind of have your pick of the litter. And when you have your pick of the litter, you can go and be like, okay, is this best player available? Well, yeah. I mean, you probably still have the best player available at a position of need that you would be drafting at number 8 overall. So I don't think it's out of question that it could be one of those things where you get more bang for your buck and that you do fill a position of need and it is a best player available at the exact same time in the exact same breath. So for me, it's like, is that wishful thinking? Is that hopeful thinking? Is that being too like positive in an outlook? But every single time I like read anything about what these draft analysts are saying league wide, it's all about these quarterbacks. And I think that when it comes down to it, there are going to be some teams like the Broncos, like the Vikings, who are going to feel a lot of pressure to go up and get those guys because they don't know if they're going to fall down to them. If you're the Falcons, I think that is exactly what you want because then you have the opportunity to go get honestly exactly who you want and need. And a want and a need can be simultaneous, I think, in this situation.
Yeah, definitely. So we, of course, are wrapping up today's episode by talking about the incomparable Eddie Goldman and whether or not we will actually see him suited up in a Falcons uniform in the year of our Lord, Thomas Morstead, 2024. But we'll break that down to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, spring is here, and that means baseball is back, and Gametime now is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which means getting tickets is even faster and easier, and prices actually go down on the Gametime app the closer you get to the opening pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices viewed from your seat and their lowest price guaranteed, Gametime is taking the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Those last-minute deals mean that you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, music, etc. Those flash deals means that you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game. All-in pricing means that your totals are going to be shown up front with no surprise fees at checkout, and views from your seat. You're going to get that panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And guys, passion, drive, patience, it's the formula for winning championships and is also the formula for keeping your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, baby. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car that MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. Now, we're looking ahead to the draft, but like the Falcons have not been completely dead when it comes to free agency because they made the biggest splash of them all, bringing Eddie Goldman back for the third time. Right. If for those of you that are unfamiliar with the epic Eddie Goldman saga,
the saga, yeah,
initially signed him during July of 2022,
right,
with the idea that he was going to be sort of lining up next to Grady Jarrett and being their nose tackle. And then like 2 weeks later, Eddie Goldman was like, "No, I'm good. I'm gonna hang it up." And then last year, the Falcons are going through their free agent frenzy and spending spree, and Eddie Goldman's, you know what? I feel like I got that itch to play again, so I'm ready to come back. And so you're sitting there going like, okay, well, that's you're kind of getting a starting caliber nose tackle for free if you're the Falcons. And then Eddie Goldman decides once we get to training camp, no, I'm not really feeling it again. And so the Falcons put him on the reserve retired list for a second time. And now we learned yesterday that as the Falcons begin their offseason program, hey, Eddie Goldman's like, you know what? I have that FOMO feeling, and I want to, see what this coach Raheem Morris is all about. Maybe part of it was the Falcons hiring Jay Rodgers as their D-line coach. Jay Rodgers was the D-line coach in Chicago, where Eddie Goldman spent the bulk of his career, or all of his career, because he hasn't played a single snap with any other team, including the Falcons. But that's probably part of the enticement. So, Tori, the question I have for you is, are we going to finally see Eddie Goldman now in a Falcons uniform this year of all these comebacks?
I don't know. Truly, I don't like. And it's so funny because we were joking before we started recording. I was like, I don't know if I've ever written so many words about a player that I've never seen or met, or honestly, it's mind-boggling to me how many stories I have on this guy. And I hope that third time's the charm. I think that's because reportedly he is coming back to play for the Falcons, or I say back is a relative term. Can you come back to something that you actually were never truly a part of? I think that's the question. But if the Falcons if he does come back, I think it's a very intriguing move. But the thing is also at the exact same time, I don't buy it. I don't buy it until I see that man out in training camp taking reps with Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. I don't believe it until it happens.
Yeah, it's one of those things, because it's been an area of concern for the Falcons roster for 3 years now.
Right.
Is having that sort of kind of space eater that you want in the middle of their defense. That, and the thing that makes Eddie Goldman intriguing, because again, I did 3 shows talking about, hey, this is a huge addition 2 years ago. Is he's not only a good run defender, but he's also the rare sort of nose tackle that can rush the quarterback.
Right. Yeah.
And so if he plays, he'd be a very valuable piece for the Falcons defense.
The problem is the man hasn't played in 2 years, 2.5 years, at this point. So it's kind of hard to project, what he was for Chicago, but is that still the same guy? And 2 years is a long time to be out of it in this league, especially I hate this cliche, but it's so true. The league, NFL stands for not for long, but it's true. And so what are they getting? I don't know. I couldn't sit here and be yeah, they're getting that guy from 2 years ago that was suiting up for the Bears. I don't know. And that's, I think in terms of depth, it's always good to have bodies at offensive line and defensive line, as we saw last year when Grady Jarrett is hurt and out for half the season. But also in the same breath, it's I don't know anything about this guy. I haven't seen him take a single rep, and I don't know. It's just a huge question mark. I wish I could give more analysis, but that's it. I don't have anything.
Yeah. And even if he does show up and go through training camp, there's still going to be a part of me that the Saturday before week 1, he's going to decide to you know what, I'm good. I'm out. And then we're just all right. Until, whenever the season kicks off, September 15th or whatever that day is, 1 o'clock. Yeah, I can't. So I'm in the same shoes.
I'm not getting my hopes up to be burned yet again.
So, speaking of the Falcons bringing in Eddie Goldman, my last question for you, Tori, and something I've talked about on the podcast myself, is, do you think we'll see this team, part of the whole draft for need, draft best player available, especially if the Falcons continue to go BPA, there may be some areas of the roster that look a little unaddressed coming out of the draft.
Right.
And we've seen them already kind of adjust Taylor Heineke's contract. We might see some more restructures. Do you think it's certainly a possibility that we'll see this team continue to be proactive in the month of May, in the month of June, making roster moves similar to what they did a couple of years ago when they traded for Brian Edwards. They brought in Nick Kwiatkowski last year. They brought in Trey Flowers, among others. Bradley Pinion, I think, was another like June pickup that they had.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that we'll see this team still, being more willing to be proactive to plug some of those holes if they don't necessarily get that in draft?
100%. I think that there's going to be a lot of salary cap movement over the course of the next month. I mean, they have to have at least like $12.2 million reportedly to sign their rookie class. Like they don't have that right now, even with the Taylor Heineke restructure. So there's going to have to be moves made to get to that point. And I think beyond the draft, I 100% think that there will be guys picked up after that June 1 date. I think that's always like that first part of June is always a very active time for a team like the Falcons in recent years. And also we've seen this team go all the way up to the start of the year, the start, like first games where they're still making moves and churning kind of that bottom 4 or 5 players on a 53-man roster. So I absolutely believe so. I mean, this is just my opinion, but I don't think we've heard the last of like conversations with Calais Campbell. I know that was something that Raheem Morris talked about. If Calais does not want to retire, there's a vision for him in Atlanta. Like that's what Raheem pitched to him when they spoke. So with a guy like that, he's probably weighing his options. The Falcons are trying to weigh their options in terms of like how much money you could give somebody, what contract restructures they need to do, what a draft class looks like. There's a lot that I think can happen within the 3-4 months leading up from the draft to the season. I think we're not done seeing the Falcons make some free agency moves. I don't think so at all.
Okay. Well, Tori, that is going to do it for us here on today's episode. Hopefully we will have you back shorter than 18 months.
18 months later.
Yeah.
It's like on SpongeBob, 18 months later.
But let the people know some of the stuff that you're working on. I know you're talking about mock drafts and whatnot. What's some of the content coming their way over at AtlantaFalcons.com between now and the draft?
Gosh, so much. I mean, the mock drafts, they run every single Wednesday. And I keep telling people I have to do like 9 or 10 of these. So at some point, I'm going to pick the player that you want. Until then, just hold on. Like, I'll get there. It's cool. So ton of mock draft coverage. We have a lot of shows that'll probably be coming down the pike with our free agency show that just ran a couple weeks ago. And then we'll have a pre-draft show. We have an On the Rise that's coming. I mean, there's a lot of content overall. And then, of course, working on some big off-season projects as well. I think everybody remembers went up to Montana last off-season, do the big Troy Anderson feature. Something similar, cooking. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, there's a lot. I mean, this thing doesn't slow down. Like what I said, I'm just like crawling back to the Locked On podcast. I'm just like not triumphantly like, woo, like we are crawling, but very, very exciting. And there's a ton of stuff. I just wrapped up a Coffee with Falcons segment with Dwan Jones, who is the assistant director of college scouting for the Falcons. Really fun conversation, lots of podcasts, you name it, we're doing it.
Yep. Guys, go check that out, AtlantaFalcons.com. Check out Tori's stuff as well. She always does great work. So that is going to do it for us here. Tori, we look forward to our post-draft conversations to see exactly what type of haul the Falcons get, but always appreciate you joining me, even when we go so long without having these conversations.
It won't be as long next time.
There you go. So guys, that is going to do it for us here on today's illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about something. I don't know. I'm sure we'll talk draft. And this is also an opportunity for me to plug the Locked On Falcons Insiders, where you guys can ask questions that you get priority for future Q&As and mailbags. But also this week, you'll be able to get my Laiatu Latu, the UCLA edge rusher breakdown on film, talking about some of the things I like about Latu, some of the things that give me a little bit of pause and why he's edge 3 for me at this point in time. Hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll also do breakdowns of Dallas Turner and Jared Verse, the other 2 top edges, and sort of where exactly I stack them. I haven't finalized sort of my grades, but after that, you'll do that. So sign up in the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. You'll be able to get that Latu breakdown as well as the next one I do, probably Dallas Turner, free for 14-day free trial. And then it's $4.99 a month. And You'll also be able to get, post-draft film breakdowns of the various prospects that the Falcons add. So definitely worth your while. Go check it out at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons.